that okay? Yeah. Oh. Oh.
I think so.
Sorry.
Well, this is the third dance. They tried to put another. They tried to open the back door to do some shut down. And they tried to open. Deal messages.
Take this, great job. Well, he's been one of his. Really, I haven't.
Yes.
You
don't need this.
Yes.
Name it after that day. Yeah, that's kind of. So it's not.
Against.
Yeah, and number two. Does go up to 60 numbers. So you're gonna rebuild. So now they're trying to. That's just.
But I don't.
I just assumed.
But yeah, far away.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, but.
Yeah, Tim, you know.
So ties this to me.
So this is the agenda. This is a mayor.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, do you think we're good to go?
There should be a county road.
Do you think we're good to go there? And Ryan and Jeff?
There was. I was talking about her online.
Can you all hear me or no?
Right. Yes.
Ron, ready to get started,
It's amazing. I could try to figure out.
good? Give me a thumbs up. All right. To everybody in the room, my name is Tim Brownell. I'm the Director of the Solid Waste Department. I'm obviously not in the room. My apologies. Before we knew we were going to be starting up the SWAC again, I had a long-standing commitment in Minnesota. So I'm joining you from the center of the country today. I want to welcome everybody, appreciate everybody who's not only on the committee, but members of the public who are following this process and have some questions, concerns, thoughts. We really appreciate that all of you who are willing to participate with us in this process. It's been helpful in the past, and we know that hearing any of your thoughts, concerns, or ideas is always helpful for our committee. So thank you for your attendance today. Welcome to all those who are online as well. We appreciate you participating as well. On the agenda, we're going to have public comment early in this process, but before we do, Jeff, you want to introduce yourself, and if you wouldn't mind doing roll call, it would be appreciated.
Sure. Jeff Merwin, Deschutes County Compliance and Infrastructure Manager. Trying to do the AB here, so bear with me. We'll do roll call, committee member names. Neil Bonskar here. Brent Bybee. Jackson DeMonch.
Here.
Luke Dines. John Nielsen. Keith DeSaris.
Keith will be joining in a few minutes.
Okay. Cassie Lacey.
She said she'd be joining online. Sue, you want to make sure that she's not in the waiting.
Erica Aitzman.
Here.
Tim Shimke.
Here.
Erwin Swetnam.
Present.
Robin Bora.
Robin is out of the country.
Okay. And White and Ryan. Be over there.
So how many does that leave in current attendance?
What's that?
How many, what is the total count in attendance?
Of members.
Correct. Do we have a quorum? We need to have
Yep.
6.
Now we have 5 and then 2 pending with Keith and Cassie.
So I think we can move forward with public comment, Sue, and as if Cassie and Keith join, will be a quorum in case we need to make any decisions.
Yeah, so we'll review the minutes after the public comments, please.
Correct.
We minimize the screen and then it'll show.
Right. So with you all in the room, let's move into public comment. And for public comment, anybody who would like to speak, if you all in the room can facilitate that, we're asking people to limit your comments to 3 minutes or less, so that we can have many people as possible speak, and so that we can actually also move on to the business of the SWAC itself today. So thank you.
That's specifically signed up for,
Okay, good.
come on up, Steve.
Oh, do I sit in the chair and face the committee?
You do.
Just
Keep
like
in
the
time,
town?
3 minutes. Yes.
Okay.
So your name?
Steve Bayer, I live at 56200 Pine Mountain Road. I'm a real estate broker. I sold the Roth property to them many years ago. We have no active listings, so contrary to popular opinion, I'm not gonna make $5 million commission on the sale. I do live there. I would have to move if they select it, but I have a plan which I've shared with some people about. If the county buys that, we create some type of a refuge. There's multi-use, and I would be happy to be a candidate for the refuge manager, then I don't have to move. Okay. I still support Roth East and or Northeast. But my comment today will be, I do not think the Dodds Road site is, anywhere near should be considered just because of the traffic pattern. I travel Dodds Road fairly frequently. It's narrow, there's farm ground and ranches and livestock immediately adjacent to the shoulder. The shoulder is not big enough for bicycles as it is now. A lot of people ride bicycles out there and you get 30 trucks a day in and out. And, you know, those drivers are probably on time frame. They're not gonna, they won't exceed the speed limits, but to my way of thinking, it would be extremely dangerous to consider the Dodge Road site for the landfills. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next up, Karen Kelly.
I'm questioning my skills here. Deep breath.
If you could state your name.
Karen Kelly. 61260 Obernolte Road, Bend, Oregon. I'm Obernolte and Dodds on the junction of where they want to place this facility. Our neighborhood started a petition and we've already received several signatures. And we'll give you guys a copy. And this is just 3 days work because
Can you speak out? Because
Can't hear you.
I don't like to hear you.
okay, that's when we found out about it. We have a petition that we're having signed by people who are opposed to it. On the front, it says, the environmental impact of the end of the landfill could contaminate groundwater, harm local wildlife habitats, increase air and soil pollution, impact already limited water accessibility due to large consumption of water being utilized for the landfill. They stated it'd be 50,000 gallons of water daily from the canal. And when that goes dormant, then they would have a well dug, and several people mentioned that their wells are already going dry. Traffic and safety. We have a lot of bicycles, as the gentleman mentioned, that use that road. There was a group of culinary chef cycling that has a race there every year. They're based back east, and they raise money for child hungry. And they raise thousands of dollars for these kids for the 501. And they come to our area and generate income to our local restaurants, and they would not be back because they have no place to ride. Public health risks, decomposing waste emits hazardous gases and odors that can impact respiratory health and quality of life. Property devaluation, long-term irreversibility. Once built, the landfill is a permanent scar on our land. I attended the meetings a year or two ago that Fish and Wildlife was trying to protect the mule deer, and they wanted to put an overlay on our property, and they were telling us how we could fence it. No lights, no noise, no nothing. And yet a landfill would go against all of this. I think my blood pressure's going up. Breathe. There's also an airstrip off of Cougar Trail that is FAA approved. It's on a private house. It's grass, but it is deemed an emergency landing strip. I'm not sure how you figure if that's within the 5 to 6 mile radius, if it is as the crow flies, or if they come out Cougar Trail to Dodds and go that way, but that's definitely a concern. It's also an open range area, which is dangerous. It's the site where the local bicyclist was actually killed by a hit and run driver. So it's a kind of a sore spot for those of us that live out there. We could see it happening again. And we wondered how the transfer trucks will travel. Will it be transfers coming from just Bend or all of Deschutes County? I couldn't seem to find that out in 3 days. I have contacted Fish and Wildlife and they're anxious about that because we do have, in my property, we have bald eagles, golden eagles, we have elk, we have deer, we have all kinds of wildlife that would be impacted. And Dodds is a lateral road, not a major arterial. So I'm concerned about the load capacity and they'd have to pass by the sign that says no trucks as they turn off of Highway 20. It's 1 mile to the Chitwood Trailhead, which is, I'm in contact with the BLM also. They just sunk a ton of money into opening up the parking back there. And it's a dirt road that, he's looking at his watch.
Close.
Okay, we also have some letters from neighborhood people that couldn't attend but wanted to voice their opinions, so we'll give you that too.
No, that's great. And please do send in the written comments as well.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think Devin did that.
Mhm. I
Okay,
know we got one this
I'm gonna
morning.
go get some water now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But I'm against it.
No, thanks, Gary.
Yeah. Oh,
Next up is Abby.
Good job.
Oh,
And there were 3 more people who wanted to speak that didn't get on the list.
okay.
Well, already 2 people have said more than I have right here. My name is Abby Kelmerode. I'm a landowner and a farm owner of Boundless Farmstead at 25360 Walker Road, just off Dodds, and a user of COID services. I am totally opposed to a solid waste facility being considered on the Overnolte Road land, which is zoned EFU, and urge COID not to consider selling it to you and for you to remove it from consideration. Overnolte and the entire Dodds Road area is home to farms and ranches that are productive. Everyone in the area would be impacted by so much truck traffic, by the horrid noise created when grinding up the solid rock which is there to create the dirt needed to cover the landfill as it fills. Imagine the dust. We have a limited supply of EFU land in Deschutes County, and it is constantly being considered for various development. From what I've heard, we are losing more EFU land than any other region in Oregon. Once our farmlands are gone, they're gone. Our irrigation canal goes right by this land. The water would be endangered as well, and I didn't even know the water usage numbers, which is outrageous. I mean, this particular year, we have a little buy. We're not in drought anymore for this year, but we know that that's coming and we cannot afford to have that kind of usage used for the land for where so many wells have been drying and have had to be deepened. I just put in a well a few years ago and I went down 860 feet. And I mean, it's crazy. So we can't afford that. The bike safety that was mentioned, I didn't even think about that specifically about being the site of where that tragic and terrible bike accident happened, but Dodds is constantly being used by bicycles, constantly. We must preserve our open spaces not only for farming and ranching, but also for the open space and recreation that they provide. We cannot afford to allow it to be degraded by a landfill. Many people recreate in that area with hunting, biking, hiking, appreciated there. The wildlife, as she mentioned, includes elk, deer, porcupine, birds of all kinds, and much more. A landfill would degrade that area. The traffic would be on Dodge, which has been off limits to heavy traffic. Note the signs and isn't designed to accommodate it. Of all the areas being considered, this is the most highly populated of any of them, with hundreds of people living nearby. I know that this has been a very divisive and difficult decision. But I urge you to look more closely, possibly at the Horse Ridge site or the Roth site as they offer they're better sites. And just take this site out of consideration so that we don't all have to come and tell you how we feel. And I have a copy of this that I'll leave with you with all my
Thank you.
information.
Okay.
Next up is Brian White.
My name is Brian White. I live at 25325 Dodds Road, which is directly. Here, that land is directly across the street from me. And. I don't have anything prepared. I'm just talking from the heart. First off, did anything go out to us people that this was happening? Cause I never got one. That this meeting was coming.
The meeting was notified, but I'm not sure if letters have gone out yet.
No
letters
went out.
No.
Yeah.
I'm bothered by that. That bothers me. Like, what are we trying to sneak in? What are we doing? That, when I heard about it from a neighbor, I was like, what? That's a problem for me right out of the gate. All the things they mentioned, the person that was decapitated was right in front of my house. In front of my neighbor to their house by a vehicle. There is no shoulder. I don't know why people ride bikes on there anyway, but that's their problem. I would have like rules if they don't, because it's so highly dangerous. But the other thing is, we had the meetings with the fishing game about this alley or whatever you call it, where. So it doesn't make sense to me why we would put it down there too. And like everybody says, I train dogs in my pastures and I grow hay. And already in the last 3 years or whatever it's been since COVID, that road has changed. Like there's like I would see a car every now and then on that road. Now it's like I see 6 or 7, just as of now, without this going on. So I'm worried about the value of my property. I have 130 acres there with a rental in my house. That's right there where the entrance of this thing could be. And yeah, I'm not happy about it. When I see the other sites, I'm like, it's a no-brainer. Why are you considering it? These are people that bought homes out there with land to have some privacy and peace. And that is already eroding, like I said, with people don't know where they're from, probably from town, racing their cars down there. I hear them every day, racing at 100 miles an hour. I'm not kidding you. And I'm just like, God, I'd love to throw a spike strip out there and slow them down for a second. But so my concerns are all the things they said, but particularly it will really impact me, I believe. Because it is literally, if you had a map, my house is right there with hayfield going down this way, a pivot over here, and yeah. I'm definitely opposed and I will fight. I will fight. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So others want to speak? Okay. Now you're gonna move to the next one.
Hi, my name is Allison Light. I am Brian's wife. Yes, I I live at 25325 Dodds Road. And I must admit, I was quite shocked when I heard from neighbors and then got the document from someone that posted it on a local Facebook group. I had no idea where to find it. I went to your site and there was just kind of a lot of information. Then I finally found the document and I was very shocked to see, oh, there's our house right across the street. So I really just wanted to put a face to the closest property, it seems. And people have pointed out the traffic, the horrible accident that happened, and that particular curve, as they were heading west, the driver that hit Marika Stone, what's her name, that was killed, and there's a blind curve right there. And prior to that accident even, we have had 3 or 4 people, in order to avoid a huge elk, which there was a kind of a crossing across Dodds Road, right at our property, they crashed into our fence. Everything went well, insurance paid, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hazard and I won't go over what everyone else has mentioned, just 2 points. The prevailing winds in the summer are coming from the north, right to us. So I don't know, that could be bad, in addition to the wells, everything else. And then another thing that doesn't make any sense is, I think it was just last summer, a new trailhead was opened up 2 miles east from us on Dodds, a Tumulus trailhead. So what are we doing? Attracting, you know, for recreational use into the Badlands. And then, you know, you're gonna have this, so not a good idea. I really hope you reconsider. Take it out already. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Accept.
Yeah.
My name is Marty Kimmerling, 62012 Dodge Road. I've been on Dodge Road for 40+ years. They tried to put in quarries and stuff, reactivate quarries. We tried to put in radio towers inside of the air traffic control area for the broad zone out there. First of all, the only thing I'd like to add is Dodge Road is not engineered for a haul road. That's why the sign is up front that says, you know, only deliveries only. And I know this because when I did my driveways, the sheriff came up and asked me, you know, what's going on? And I told him, no, it's going right here. So Dodge Road would have to be improved. That bridge right there across from the lady that just spoke, that's not equipped for heavy truck traffic, but they'll be bringing in there. They'd have to make a turn lane. They'd have to completely redo Dodge Road, number one. And the elk that they're talking about, in the last 40 years, I've hit 3 deer in that quarter-mile section of that spot. We need to do an environmental impact study with fish and wildlife, because that's a main migratory path. You got no business putting an operation like this, you know, just for that reason alone. So, and that's about all I got to add. But it will affect, you know, the groundwater has been affected out there. We had to drop our well level or drop our pump a little bit. So there is a bunch of fissures and crevices and stuff out there. So that kind of water that they're going to be doing, I think that's going to have an impact on the aquifer too. So I think there needs to be some studies and some research done on this before people get carried away and make a big mistake. You know, so.
Great, thanks. Thank you.
Accept. You.
All right.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mark Salvo. I'm represent Oregon Natural Desert Association. I've been before this council before, and I just wanted to thank you all for your willingness to reconvene and reconsider landfill siting here in the county. I know you all thought you'd made this decision once before, and here we go again. I just wanted to provide some information for your use in your continued deliberations about where best to site a future landfill here in Deschutes County. Is Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife also indicated this most recent letter to the advisory committee. We have a concern about potential siting and the attraction that a landfill is to ravens and the impact of ravens on sage-grouse populations. I don't know if it's been as clearly presented as I might do here, but especially sites in the Milliken Valley could end up being incredibly problematic for what is now considered one of the most promising populations of greater sage-grouse in the state of Oregon. It's a species that has suffered decades of decline, but the population centered in and around Brothers, Oregon, in that core habitat area that you're all familiar with, is now deemed to be one of the most important for the species' continued persistence here in the state. Science suggests that ravens will travel anywhere between 40 kilometers and even 50 miles from a landfill or other anthropogenic subsidy, if you will, support for ravens to go prey on sage-grouse nests, eggs, chicks, and potentially even adults. I've made some copies of some maps here for the council for your information to show what a 50-mile buffer looks like compared to some of the sites that are under consideration in the Milliken Valley. Topography seems to be an important factor because the ravens right now, and there's probably 24 of them floating around in the thermals that have not landfilled today, and will be every day and week after week, month after month, year after year, for as long as that landfill is there, don't appear to be having any impact on sage-grouse populations. They're certainly within 50 miles of the nearest sage-grouse nesting and brood-rearing habitat, but those ravens have to make a choice. They can either circle around and take advantage of a landfill, or they can decide to go prey on sage-grouse, but they're too lazy to do both. And so one thing that I would suggest to the committee is anything on this side of the ridge is likely to be more important for sage-grouse population, more supportive of sage-grouse conservation than on the other side, where ravens might have more variability, more opportunity to both use the landfill as a subsidy, but also prey on sage-grouse in the area. So again, we have no particular preference for any of these sites, but as MDF&W and our organization, local Bird Alliance chapters and others have expressed, the sage-grouse population here in Central Oregon is really important, and landfill siting anywhere near it could be really problematic for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Rory?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rory Isbell. I'm the Rural Lands Program Director and a staff attorney with Central Oregon Land Watch. Our organization, along with the Oregon Natural Desert Association and the Environmental Center, sent in a letter to you all yesterday. Not sure if you've had a chance to see it yet, but I did send it to Tim yesterday afternoon. We've been tracking your work over the last few years and saw what happened after the sort of last process, and we were optimistic when this committee came back together to start reviewing potential sites for siting a landfill. Last time around, the finalists were sites in eastern Deschutes County, and much like Mark Salvo just told you, a lot of those sites have outsized impacts to wildlife, connected landscapes, and recreational pursuits, that are present out in the eastern half of the county. So we wanted to write in to encourage you all to give further consideration to sites closer to the developed footprint of the county that can prevent some of those impacts to wildlife and habitat, recreation, and also transportation and climate impacts that over the lifespan of a landfill will add up. We reduce of course, the distance that those hauling trips have to take. We really mitigate those impacts. One specific thing that we described in the letter was that we wanted to think about, and we were, spent some time researching what the FAA 5-mile recommendation for siting a new landfill. It's our understanding that last time around, this committee sort of in interpreting that recommendation measured from the boundary of any airport property. But we looked into those recommendations from FAA, and they talk about really it's applicable to an air operations area, well inside the boundary of an airport property. And you know, we haven't done all the analysis of potential sites, but we wanted to recommend that the committee perhaps think about that 5-mile buffer recommendation. And if you measure it differently, how many other potential landfill sites could come into your consideration? Of course, the sites that are on your packet for today, several of them continue to be in far eastern Deschutes County that have those impacts I described. So some combination of a smaller landfill size, which we know you're also open to this time around, and adjusting that 5-mile measurement could open up more alternatives for your consideration. We also know, you know, that there's examples locally, for instance, in Crook County, the landfill is adjacent to the airport. We're not saying that's best practice or that we would recommend something like that, but there are mitigation strategies. We understand that out there in next to Prineville Airport, landfill uses auditory deterrents, you know, things like broadcasting predatory bird calls to dissuade some of those ravens from, you know, interrupting aircraft operations. So, you know, we're also sensitive to, if you consider sites closer to the developed footprint of the county, more conflicts with people and farmers and ranchers can rise. We're of course very sensitive to those concerns and understand the concerns of many that we've heard in the community today. But nonetheless, we wanted to make sure that we're not leaving anything off the table, and that the second process, we might be considering other sites closer to the developed footprint of the county. So thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Leroy Cabana, 23365 Bear Creek Road. I have been following the SWAC process since the first day it started. And at the very first, one of the things that was really sensitive to the entire committee and the community itself was what's the environmental impact. And there was a lot of talk about not wanting to go out to Rock East because you had to drive up the hill and all this other stuff, and that was going to burn more energy. And this was going to be a 100-year landfill. And my idea is probably in 20 years, we're probably going to have electric dump trucks anyway, or electric trucks. So, you know, we should maybe think about that a little bit. But one thing that keeps driving, I really would like the committee, if they have this information, and if they don't, they should figure it out, because I'm fairly familiar with aggregate and hard rock drilling and stuff like this. And this just seems to be, I look at something like the Dodge Road, and I don't have a bear in the fight with the Dodge Road deal, but what I do have a concern about any of these sites that has this hard volcanic rock that has to be drilled, blasted, ground up, and all this other stuff. And there's been a lot of effort and a lot of concentration on, you know, how many miles is it, or what are we going to do? I mean, this is, in my view, this is small potatoes compared to what it's going to cost to blast and grind up all this stuff for 100 years to get down to what is this thing going to, what is the ultimate depth for this thing? 40, 50, 60 feet? And it's like, you know, a mile wide or a half a mile wide or whatever. We're talking about an unimaginable amount of energy and power that's going to go here. It's going to dwarf any little conversation about, oh, we go another 4 miles or 6 miles or whatever. In fact, I think it might be time for this committee to also revisit shipping the landfill material out, because they really need to start considering what is the real cost. I would like this committee to provide the public with an estimate of what it would cost yearly to go into this hard rock and drill down into it and turn it into pebbles, you know? I mean, and then at the last meeting I was here, there was a little bit of conversation about some of this material isn't even really good because it allows the gases and stuff to escape up through it because it doesn't have overburden, right? And so I'm not hearing anything about any of this stuff, but what I really, you know, the public involvement, it's hard for us to have public involvement if we don't have information to form an opinion, right? And I would like to know, what is it going to cost to drill down into this hard rock stuff? When we started out here, we had like 60 or 70 sites or something like this. And I just slapped myself in the forehead about 40 of them. You know, I mean, you got to be kidding me. Why don't we just go drill into the granite wall, you know? If it's possible, could you guys give us some sort of estimate? What it would cost to do business at these hard rock places where, you know, you got maybe a foot or two of overburden and then you just got solid rock for the next 900 feet, right? So as far as if we're gonna consider the environmental impacts of all this stuff, and I'm looking at just for the Dodge one, you know, you look at excavation costs, 5. Well, that just means it's 5 times as much or something than Horse Ridge, right? But what is it? I mean, is it a couple $100, a couple $1,000, is it $20,000, $2 million? We as the public have absolutely no idea, and I bet you don't either, right? Do you? So this would be really useful information for the public to actually come to you and have a useful input to you. I mean, all these people have useful input, but this seems to be left out of the equation. And it's 100 years we're gonna be drilling into this stuff, you know? So
Thank you, Leroy.
I'm sorry if I exceeded my time here, but
So wait a second, I'm gonna have daily blasting. I live across from the Dobbs roadside, so I'm gonna have daily explosions going off. Well, this sounds fantastic.
anyway, that was my concern. I mean, we need to have all of the information. You guys just have these little numbers on here. It doesn't tell us. Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. Apologize.
All right, Chris Olson, 24432 Dodds. Man, let's hear it. You guys got a number?
We'd like to get comments before we
Oh,
start.
you guys don't answer questions here,
Well, this is public comment. It's not us talking, it's.
so you don't know the number.
I did not say that. I said,
Well, let's hear
we want to respond
When are
to
we gonna get
comments.
that answer?
At the final site evaluation level, we go into the cost, and I encourage you all to read it. We went into this level of detail for the Roth East site and the Moon Pit site with volume estimates, which require detailed grading design to estimate the volumes of cubic yards of material, and we do geophysical testing. All of that has a cost to study sites at that level of detail. We did that at the final site evaluation level for the finalist sites and had dollar figures at that level of study. At this point, we're still, the net is still fairly broad and multiple sites have been considered. So that level of study hasn't happened yet, but we do have a section of the presentation that goes into qualitative cost factor analysis, which reflects the key cost components for various sites and helps give us a sense of how they compare in terms of cost.
How did Dodds even get brought into this? With so many people affected by it? How did it come up?
We'll get to that. Yeah.
All right, perfect. The other comment, I'm not surprised there isn't a county commissioner here, not one of them, but whatever. I think Alfalfa area has already had enough dumped on it with the marijuana and all that, not to bring up that whole issue. But I think we've done our part for the county and board decisions, and this is a terrible decision. Besides people riding their bikes, the road is not equipped for semis of any size. So that's all I gotta say.
Thanks. Any other?
Hi Kelly, 24780 Dodds Road. There'd be one piece of property between us and this site. And along with all the other stuff that was brought up, my thought is usually a site like this goes into a location away from town. And if you choose to buy land and move into that area, that's kind of on you. To plop it into a neighborhood, I mean, it is a neighborhood, it's big properties, but it is a neighborhood. Imagine how you would feel if it was across the street from your house. And so that's the big thing. I think everything else has been covered, but that's the big thing for me. Put this somewhere where if someone wants to move and live near it, it's on them to do it, and they understand what the value of the property is gonna be to put it in the middle of a bunch of properties that it will affect our values for sure. That's all I have.
Thanks. Amen. Any other comments?
Can I just-
Oh, okay. You come up.
Suzanne Ritter, 25620 Alfalfa Market Road. We have water rides with COID, we do irrigation, we have cattle. one thing about water, I'm very concerned about water. Water is life. For all of us, for humans, for animals, for cattle, for wildlife. What we noticed when the pot growth went into alfalfa is the wells went dry. A lot of them. A lot of people had to dig deeper or new wells. That can cost you anywhere between 20,000 and 100,000 per well. These are numbers that a lot of the farmers and ranchers cannot afford. Another thing is the contamination of water. There is an irrigation canal apparently right next to this property. And you guys want to drill a well and pull 50,000 gallons a day out of it, at least for 6 months out of the year. That will let wells dry. We know that from the last decade of experience with the pot growth where that happened. This is volcanic soil. Even the professors at the universities in town say, you do not know how deep the stuff is, how fast it runs dry, the springs on Bachelor, the water that comes down from the snow melting, is it 2 years old or 60 years old? We don't know. If you want to drill a well, you have to drill test wells. You know, you can't just say, I have ground penetrating radar and I know where this aquifer is. It doesn't work that way. One of the things that I would be worried about, if you want to dig down 60 feet, and a lot of those wells are 80 feet, you're going to have groundwater contamination that's going to come up in people's houses. They're going to get sick and you're going to have lawsuits. Not just from the people, but also then from cattle with the irrigation canal and everything. That is uncalculable. You don't know if it's gonna happen. You're gonna say that it's probably gonna happen, and then it's gonna be bad. Okay, and I don't know how to put a price tag on health. Then the gases, obviously, so you're not gonna have just water contamination, but soil contamination, air contamination. And then I looked at the costs that you guys drew up. I didn't see anything about rebuilding Dodds Road in there. In the costs. I didn't see anything about building a new bridge. Is that even possible? Can you make the road wider? What are the, where are the property lines around all that? I mean, and the other thing is generally in this Central Oregon area, we are gonna lose more farmland. If you have looked at the price of hay and cattle, it's going up and up and up, becoming more valuable. We're gonna lose more of Madras. We're already at 20% of, allocation of water for Madras, and this year it's 25 of normal or whatever, even with the Wiki Up coming up to 91%. And the spotted frog thing, we went out there to a cattle farm not too long ago in Madras, and they're gonna say by 2027, which is only 2 years away, they're gonna even suck more water out of Wiki Up in the middle of winter when the frogs hibernate, don't get me going. But that will mean that there's even less water for the largest ag area in this Central Oregon area. So there's more people gonna not have cattle, not do farming because it costs.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else?
Gary Dodds from 24825 Dodge Road, 24755 Dodge Road. I just have to say that when I moved out east of town 25, 30 years ago, I was not at all interested in living across from a dump. That wasn't my dream, still isn't. And I agree with my neighbors wholeheartedly that the thing is misconstrued to even be in line for a thought for a site for a dump. My well recently went dry, in fact, in the last month. And it does cost a lot of money to put it back together. But that's basically all I have to say against it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
One, Steve Worsta, 25175 Dodds Road. I took a look at your, the land on web soil survey, and the whole area that has been cordoned off for Dodds is a hard rock area, excluding the sandy loam that's around it. So I know for a fact you guys are gonna need to blast all of that out. My house shakes with blasting from the quarries in that area, and we're talking miles and miles away, my house shakes. So I'm expecting what, once a week, I should be feeling, it's gonna be like a movie, everything on my shelves rocking back and forth because you guys have decided to blast rock. Where are you gonna get your overburden from? Are you gonna steal all the sandy loam from the nearby area and just scrape that? It varies from 1 to 3 feet, so you're gonna just scrape that and just leave it a barren area, or are you gonna haul it in? That would be a very interesting, so now we're gonna double the number of trucks, because every day you have to put overburden. Or is it gonna be coming down Johnson Ranch Road and onto Alfalfa and then on to Dodds? Are we gonna be getting truckloads of waste from Redmond or anywhere in that area? I wanna know, because then all of a sudden now we're gonna have truck traffic coming in different ways, or where you're gonna get your overburden from. I don't know if that's been thought of, but I'm really excited that my entire house, I'm gonna have to safety proof all of my expensive objects that are gonna be shaking on the wall, because I am only, I don't know, 1/10 of a mile from your blasting zone, so good choice.
I think we have time for maybe a couple more comments if there are any, and then we've got a lot to cover.
My name is Devin Larson. I live at 25025 Dodds Road. My husband and I moved in last year. We're right across from the site as well. And when I was looking at your guys' information packet, the big thing that it just comes down to, I just want to humanize Dodds Road in the area to you guys. When you look at all the other sites, it seems like there's less than 10 residences there. And this site in particular, only within 2 miles, there's 60 sites and wells, 60 residences. So think about, the hundreds of people, all the wells that are going to be impacted by this. And, another big thing is the bus stop is right in front of my house. That bus driver, he has to get really creative because of that blind corner already. And so I can imagine how dangerous that will be for the kids in our neighborhood who are trying to get on and off the bus as well. So again, just really want to, again, oppose with all my neighbors the site. And ideally, we just don't even want this site considered. We don't want to have to go to CYD. We don't want to have to go to all these meetings. We just want you guys to take it off the list completely so that we don't have to continue to fight for this. We hope that you guys can join us in that. So thank you so much for listening to all of us.
Is there anyone online that would like to comment?
We have no raised hands.
Perfect. Jim, you want to carry us?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody who took time out of your day to drive all the way down to the roads department. Really appreciate you coming and making the comments. I do want to stress that we are not in a place where we have any decision around wanting to move forward with Dodds Road. When we reconvened, the committee looked at the potential of sites that didn't meet our original criteria of 100 years or longer as a landfill site. Dodds Road would be a site that would provide potentially up to 85 years of capacity. So that's how it came onto it. Where we are in the process is just as that is now being a site identified as possible. There is no commitment from the solid waste department or this committee that this is a site we want to move forward with. what we've done with this site is what we did to many sites in the previous process, where we just begin the assessment. Part of what we're responsible for is to identify potential sites that we would then do, and what you'll see today is some of the initial assessment. I think it'll respond to some of your questions and concerns. I think there are other issues that you've brought up today that are going to be helpful in our assessment and analysis of this site. But I initially want to say we really appreciate you for taking all of this time to come and speak to us, speak to the committee, take this time out of your day. We are not committed to this site, first and foremost. If we were to say that this site is of significant interest, if COID were to say this site is available, then we would do outreach to, that would be the point at which we would do direct outreach to everybody within 2 miles. So we really understand that this is a impactful and emotional issue for all of you in this room. I want to first acknowledge and appreciate that. If we were to be significantly interested, this would have a much more robust process. You would get a lot more information. This would provide you with much more information, but we truly want to acknowledge that this is not just have financial impact, it's an emotional issue too. So thank you for coming. Thank you for speaking to us. We appreciate you. So with that, I want to have us start the work of the committee. We do have an agenda in front of you all for the committee to approve. Is there a motion to approve?
You're referring to the minutes, not the agenda. I'll make a motion to approve the minute.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor?
Aye. And then just double checking our quorum, I think we had somebody else join online.
Yeah, we have Keith Caceres and Cassie Lacey are both online, so we have quorum now.
Perfect.
And for the record, can we state the name of who made the motion and who seconded?
Sorry, that was Neil Bonsgard made the motion.
Erwin Swetnam seconded.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Okay. I'm going to hand it over to you, Ryan, to run the presentation.
Jack, tell me to run that. You want to drive? Sure. Why don't you provide some property acquisition updates? I'll bring the slide forward to that.
So yes, relative to the sites that we have been looking at, the Horse Ridge site, we have met with 2 of the 3 owners who have expressed interest, the Horse Ridge Pit LLC and the Hap Taylor and Sons LLC. That owner is Knife River. The last group we're looking to meet with is ODOT. We've been working the last several weeks to try and get a meeting with them. We're hoping that will ultimately occur within the next 2 weeks to determine their interest. It's possible that we could build the facility around their holding, but it would be much more advantageous for us to be able to get an agreement from all 3 that they are willing, and then actually move forward on letters of intent. The Dodds Road site, we've just had initial discussions with staff at COID. They had a board of directors meeting last week, and they are gonna further discuss it at their next meeting in early July. I believe it's July 8th. They have made no commitment.
Tim. I believe you said they have made no commitment. Just to clarify.
No, they have not made it, and sorry. Their initial, if they were to do anything, they would want to lease it, but they haven't even made any sort of decision if it is of interest to move forward with. The Roth site, they are motivated sellers and very interested in selling property and have provided pricing and more details. And the Golden Basin site, which we had discussed at our last meeting, they had in the last go round indicated that they had no interest in selling. Subsequent to that, it had been listed on the market, but we have done several outreach to them. They've been unresponsive, so we are taking that as they have made their statement that they are not interested.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, thank you.
I'm gonna hit on a couple items with the public outreach. So engagement has occurred with the Warm Springs tribe. Shared information with them on the sites as well as on kind of the process that we're going through with this. Having reopened it, and it's been good because they re-engage with us as well as with the county to keep that going. So that's been good. Recreational outreach. So with the stakeholder groups there, this has been particularly with the Horse Ridge site because up on Horse Ridge, there's some bicycle trails and other recreational uses. And so making sure getting out to the recreational community. The Regional Solutions Team, which is a kind of a consortia of different agencies, reached out to them, just giving them an update on where the process is, had gone through that on the prior sites with Moon Pick when we were going through further investigation there. So just kind of wanted to keep them up to date on everything. And then the environmental advocacy. So working with the Central Oregon Conservation Network, as well as other environmental groups and conservation groups, just to keep them up to date on what's happening with the process. So that's been ongoing in the last month or two for that. The next thing that we kind of wanted to hit, so kind of the roadmap ahead, which is kind of shows where we're at with the supplemental screening here. The other thing that I wanted to note, one of our slides at the very end, which is kind of the SWAC discussion that we'll have after the presentation here. We laid out several questions here, and I just kind of wanted to state those up front for the SWAC again, prior to the presentation, so you have these in mind as we go through this. So first off, do the analyses appear to be accurate and fair? The purposes of comparing the candidate sites that we're talking about in the supplemental work here. Number two, at this point, what sites do you think would best serve the county long-term based on presented analyses? So moving forward with those sites. Are there sites, number three, are there sites you would recommend removing from further consideration? Number four, are there any additional data or considerations to incorporate? And then five, other thoughts and questions. So keeping these questions in mind as Ryan goes through the different sites here, gets into quite a few details on the sites, and then a lot of comparison between the sites in some later slides. And I think that will really tee things up for a good discussion here after that. So,
yeah, thanks, Ryan. So let's dive into the supplemental site screening preliminary results. Again, this is the first look, well, I guess a second look at some of these sites, but part of this process, this is the first look at at the findings through three different lenses that we have. As you've heard through the public comments, there are three kind of main objectives that seem to be rising to the top. There's cost effectiveness, there's minimizing impacts to people and minimizing impacts to wildlife, kind of like a triangle. And we hear comments kind of pulling or pushing per se in different directions. Prioritizing one of those three over the other. And really, we're trying to find a good balance between these three priorities. And we have three different analyses here that we'll present that really get at all three of those and seek to strike the balance between these kind of competing objectives. And we've heard comments in all pushing sites, further away from people and some closer to population centers and, encouraging us to consider the cost effectiveness. So it's been great to hear what everyone's had to say. And so the role of the SWAC here is to kind of synthesize all these different forces, in landfill siting. And hopefully this analysis will be informative for the SWAC in that effort. Just a reminder, the decision will be made regarding landfill siting by the Board of County Commissioners and the SWAC's roles. And that decision will be based on the recommendations of the SWAC, which is based on the information presented here through our analyses and from public comment. So a difficult but important role that the SWAC plays here. Just a little bit of background on how we got to these alternate sites. After the Moon Pit negotiations were halted, three options were presented to the advisory committee. One was go with Roth East. It was already studied at the same level as Moon Pit, and the sellers are ready to strike a deal. The second option was to look at a couple other alternate sites, which were previously eliminated due to size. Also sites that, were affected by habitat mapping changes, and sites that that seem to have a change in their ownership posture towards selling and the acquisition potential. So, and then the third option was to look at adjusting the site selection criteria, going back further, looking at even the FAA siting criteria could have been a part of that. And then screen the whole county again, kind of from square one. And so the SWAC in a month or two ago had decided to look at, kind of strike the balance between those extremes and look at a couple alternate sites. And so that's how we got here, and that's how these alternate sites were identified. One other thing to note while we're looking at this map is just that we are monitoring some changes that may be in the works regarding federal land and acquisition opportunities. There's some stuff that's happening at federal level. It's too soon to say where that will go, but we are keeping an eye on that. And if there is something more to say about it, we can at the next meeting. But that's all on that for now. So let's take a first look at Roth East. This site's been around for quite a while and it's been studied in great detail. Finalist site. Further studies not required for selection of this site. You heard Steve Taylor earlier talking about this site. It's near the southeast extent of the Milliken Valley and Basin. It's within low density sage grouse habitat. Core sage grouse zone is about half a mile southeast of the disposal area around here off the page. There's a variety of recreational uses in the broad vicinity of Milliken Valley. Hear about paragliding, the observatories several miles to the south and up the hill, hiking, OHV, shooting, etc. Nearest residence is about 0.7 miles distant. It's set back a mile from Pine Mountain Road and Highway 20, a good amount of setback. Screened from view by topography, there are some foothills that help to screen it from both Pine Mountain Road to the west and Highway 20 to the north. Roughly 23 to 27 miles from the waste centroid. All Roth properties have recently been offered for sale, which consists of about 3,000 acres. Cost effective to excavate and operate due to 300 feet of alluvial sediment deposits, sands, gravels, easy digging. This would be a cost effective site to operate in that regard. You can see it scores moderately well in all three categories. And
How many years?
well over 100. Yeah, I think in the final site evaluation, it showed roughly 125 years of capacity. And there's flexibility within that large tax lot and the hillside further to the south to extend that capacity even further. So an excellent site for soils and capacity. And yeah, anyone from the SWAC, feel free to interrupt us as we go through if you have questions. This is a view from just west of Pine Mountain Road. It is not right off of Pine Mountain Road. It's quite a ways up towards where you see the transmission lines. If you're familiar with the area and on Pine Mountain Road, if you look for the transmission lines, it's around there, up towards the foothills of Pine Mountain.
And we're trucking water to this site.
There's several different options to explore. The ultimate goal would be to have water rights and an industrial well on site. There have been some ideas presented recently that separate parcels that the tax law consists of could use to drill exempt wells, a collection of exempt wells. That theory hasn't yet been confirmed whether that's viable, but ultimately water right transfers would be the goal, but in the interim, trucking water would be an option. And then exempt well usage as a baseline water supply or water source.
When we did detailed costing on this site, we actually had hauling in there just as the worst case. Yeah, on the last round, that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Whatever that number.
Oh,
Ryan and Dwight, one comment. One of the reasons we selected this earlier was, correct me if I'm wrong, was due to the fact that the nice sediment base, as you talked about earlier, so a lot less rock blasting would have to happen in this area. Is that correct? Just want to make sure that's right.
yes.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Back those. Scoot and borrow.
So I think you mentioned 300 feet. Would there be a need to go any deeper for any reason?
No, abundant depth of those soft soil. I mean, soil cobbles as well, but no blasting is needed to break up consolidated rock. Yeah. So this is, I won't go through all these details. The SWAC had the presentation before the meeting, so if you have any specific questions on the scoring, let us know. Again, this has been scored and a part of this consideration for a long time now, so nothing new here. But the high points are site availability and acquisition potential. The development scores as good as it could in terms of soils, topography, site capacity, and configuration. Some of the low points for Rock Northeast or Rock East have to do with the proximity to sage grouse, as we've heard concerns about. You can see how it doesn't score so well with regard to wildlife area combining zones, antelope, North Blind Oak Deer, Winter Range. Those are low point sage grouse, not in core, but pretty dang close to core, half mile away. And so it gets hit with regard to those criteria. Yeah. And so next, we'll take a look at Rock Northeast, which is a slight variation of Rock East. Same tax lot, just looking at a different location that avoids a mapped sage grouse migration route. That's based on the habitat connectivity model. It is theoretical, but it's an established map that gives some insight into where sage grouse might travel. So we looked at this site as a way to avoid physically interrupting that migration route. It provides less capacity, roughly 80 years of disposal capacity within this 197 acre footprint. It is fairly visible from Highway 20 to the north. Excavated soils can be used to berm up along the highway and the frontage of the property to better screen it. It is situated to the north and east of a ridge line that's kind of hard to see here through the aerial, but there's a fairly significant soft foothill here that it can be hidden within. It's closer to Highway 20, which would require less development for an access road, so there's some cost savings there. Same situation in terms of water supply, although it's further from the existing well on the property, which is further up the hill. And a little bit further from the core sage grouse zone. We haven't done geophysical testing of this portion of the property yet, but nearby well logs suggest similar deep deposits of sand, gravel, and clay. And cobble deposits, so cost-effective excavation is anticipated at the site for excavation and operations, but further investigation would be needed, so. If there's great interest in the site and it moves to the final site evaluation level, then borings and geophysical testing would help confirm the subsurface soil conditions. There's also transmission lines throughout the northeast corner of the site, and that further constrains the site. It scores very similar to Roth East. I think the key differences are with regard to site capacity. And so you can see that this is how it would be visible from Highway 20, fairly visible going towards Bend, say from Burns or Brothers, going west would be visible there. From Pine Mountain Road though, and looking eastward on Highway 20, it would be much less visible due to this separating ridge line. And you can see the area is already fairly disrupted by the transmission lines. The key differences in terms of scoring for the site, capacity is a fair bit less, so it doesn't score as well in terms of development. And then visibility due to proximity to the road. So altogether, it appears to be scoring not quite as well as Roth East, which came out as 3.60. Composite score together with Roth Northeast is 3.49.
So I tried to catch myself up on the previous version of the SWAC, but when the sites were narrowed last time, Roth East, not Northeast, made it as a finalist and went into the final consideration. So was there anything that changed? Because both were on the table, none of them got taken off of the list from the things we talked about at the last meeting, right? Both, let me rephrase that. Is there anything that's changed from the last set of analysis to this analysis between the two sites? And do we know why? Yeah, basically, has anything changed to consider this above Roth East in comparing the two?
I think the main thing is the habitat connectivity map for sage grouse, which shows the band of black death kind of running through the site, which it doesn't really, isn't reflected in the permitting process or the mitigation requirements. And so that's, but it does appear that it could have significant impacts to migration and connection between different leks.
Okay.
You know, being physically on that migration route. And so this was in response to that information that was presented at that. I think that came out either at the final site screening portion of the process or the final site evaluation. So this was an alternate, largely in response to that mapping.
Okay, and that mapping is assuming that there is whatever the current criteria that's built in to build that model, which is not having a landfill close to either of these sites, which I imagine would in reality modify that. Okay.
Yeah.
But making that change from east to northeast, correct me if I'm wrong, it doesn't change the actual score.
It has slight changes to, you know, criteria such as capacity. It scores down in that sense. Also,
But from the natural environment perspective, that didn't look like it.
I think you're right, yeah.
You're right, it does.
340, 340. Yeah, so that's what I was saying. It's not really a part of the criteria, habitat connectivity. The criteria looks at proximity to leks and the mitigation framework that the site would have to step through.
I think that another reason why Northeast is considered now is because we've relaxed our size requirements.
Yeah.
So we wanted 250 acres, 100 years. This doesn't provide that, but we're willing to live with 80 years.
Yeah,
that's a great point. Yeah, thank you.
So would this be an 80-year?
Roughly, yes. There's a lot of variables that go into capacity, how deep you go, how high you go. Not here. not landfill here, it's a height limitation, it's been imposed. Roughly 35, 40 feet. If something like that was applied here, that would significantly curtail the capacity of the site. But if it's truly is that deep with sand, and gravel, and clay, you can go down at the site. So there's a number of variables there for capacity, but also with time, disposal, we translate to years based on a set of assumptions, such as recovery rate and the waste generated per capita and population growth. And so if there's changes to those variables, an 80-year site could be a 100-year site if people generate less waste and recover more. And the population doesn't grow as much, so there's a lot of variables.
Is there higher risk due to the proximity to this road that there would be height restrictions placed on this particular area?
We have just started coordination and plan to have a meeting with county planners here soon to talk about the height limitation and zip code and precedent that might play into that.
Yeah, and height limitations are really on topographic features like this are really dependent on what your promontories are around. So we do have, some ridges and other aspects of this site, for instance, that would allow it to go higher. Whereas like a site like Dodd, where it's pretty darn flat out there, a height restriction is really gonna be much more restrictive on a site like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and see, there's an intermediate height point here, and so it's sometimes the height restrictions come from, neighbors, wanting to have that limitation to preserve views or whatnot. So it's somewhat site specific, but there's no broad, broadly applicable height limitation. So there are slope limitations and just practical limitations. How high to go.
And it mentioned all raw properties, 3,000 acres. Is that a 50-50 split? Are they with northeast and east, or those 1,500 acres apiece-ish, or?
So there's two huge rock parcels. Each one's about 1,500, 1,700 acres. Yeah, a lot of land. So this would include land that's not needed for the landfill. That could be useful for mitigation or the wildlife refuge that Steve wants to run. For example, hypothetically. So unless there's further questions on Rothies, we'll keep moving.
And one thing I'll say about the scoring is some of the later slides we have are comparison slides, so you can see all 5 sites together and, comparison of the scoring with those.
That's right, yeah. So next up, Horse Ridge. The scores pretty well across the board, particularly in site characteristics and engineering. This was a site that was reviewed at the broad site screening level, but at the time, Eagle Nest data indicated there may be a nest on the site, which at the time was a fatal flaw. Also, it was in a sage grouse zone, but the recent sage grouse zones have changed that. And so it scores better in that regard, and it's a more viable site due to those several changes.
And I'll point out that Golden Eagle was not on the site. It was within, I think, a quarter of a mile. It's identified as within a quarter of a mile.
Yeah, more updated data that we've received since then shows, I think it's between 1 mile and 2 miles away further south. A ridge or two south of the site. Horse Ridge is emanating ridges. So it's separated by the high ridge line of Horse Ridge to the south. And so those are impacts that can be mitigated for.
So is the land to the west and the south and the east of the footprint there, is that all BLM?
All that green is BLM. There are private parcels here to the east, some of which are owned by Horse Ridge Pit LLC. All 3 property owners are in contact with the county with varying levels of I guess, interest and willingness to meet. Well, all are willing to meet, but we've already met, as you heard from Tim, with Knife River and Horse Ridge Pit LLC, met on site with Knife River. The county owns this portion, which could be land that's useful for a number of things. Also, this parcel is a part of the Knife River parcel up here. And then, so ODOT is the last party to have a meeting with. And the county's working on getting that set up. It's tucked into, I mean, it consists of 3 pits already, so these are already disturbed properties in that regard. There's already some excavation that's occurred in those sites, creating that free airspace. There's additional depth of sedimentary deposits, sand, gravel, relatively easy digging before that the basalt is reached at this kind of low valley here. There's 30 to 50 foot deep deposits through here. This pit's gone the deepest. So anyways, there's relatively easy digging in the central band. And then rock excavation would be needed up in these higher portions and ridges where needed. But really, this site presents the opportunity for a hillside landfill that kind of takes off from the highest point here and then goes out laterally and essentially extends the foothills. But it's well below the high point of the ridge. It may only be 25 to 30% of the elevation of Horse Ridge from bottom to top. And so it would still be dwarfed by Horse Ridge behind it. And only visible from some portions of Highway 20 where you can peek through the trees, but otherwise, it's pretty well hidden in that pocket. And so here's some aerial imagery or some drone imagery we got on the site. We met with Hooker Creek. This is the Horse Ridge Pit LLC portion there. This is the ODOT pit, and then this is the Knife River pit. And then that's roughly the extent of the property. This isn't exact, but gives a sense of the extents and just how high it would go. And as you can see, there's plenty more of the mountain there that it wouldn't touch. Mountain biking trails, some people may be aware that there's trails that go through here. There's one trailhead here that could skirts around the property and goes up here. Then there's trails that go off here on from the other side of the site. And there's a trailhead roughly quarter mile, half mile to the east of the site. So
life expectancy.
well over 100. Yeah, particularly if the road can be rerouted and more of that capacity can be utilized in this pocket. You know, so you can imagine a meandering road. It's old highway right of way. Before ODOT straightened things out, pick this up. So there's some discussion to be had there. With ODOT about that potential for county to take over that right of way and make some changes to improve the capacity, but even within this footprint. Preliminary estimates indicate we can get 100 years in this pink area south of the road and more beyond that.
With 3 different property owners, would that still be possible if you didn't get participation? Like, is it possible to move forward with this if you didn't get all 3 property owners?
It does become more complicated.
Right.
Not everyone-
Yeah, even though that WashDOT or that ODOT area is relatively small.
It's hard to let that sit. Okay.
So it
Yeah.
does mess it up, yeah.
That would probably bring it to 70 years, and it
Yeah.
takes a painful chunk out of it.
Yeah.
Okay, just geometrically. Yeah, so,
That was gonna be my question as well, so thank you for asking it.
yeah. Hoping things go well at this meeting with ODOT. Just some high points, there's four properties total, owned by the county, ODOT, Knife River, for our equipment. 3 acquisitions would be required, obviously, if the county owns it. We talked a bit about capacity already. Soil and geology, the central band of sand and gravel, up to 30 feet deep, underlain by basalt. Soils here are rated excellent for landfill use. And existing permitted mines have already partially excavated in parts of the site. Groundwater is very deep, roughly 900 feet below grade. It's a confined aquifer system, and there's no wellhead protection areas nearby for municipal wells. There's 2 existing wells on site, and with those, there's the potential for up to 10,000 gallons per day under exempt use year round. During the warmer parts of the year, when more water is needed, up to 50,000 gallons per day. For dust suppression, water would need to be trucked in until the county can secure water rights to provide all of that. One of the site owners holds nearby water rights, and so there's some potential there, or from another water rights holder to transfer water rights. It could be a needs.
what is that, when we are saying that we have to truck water for this, what does that, amount of truck traffic look like compared to the waste hauling?
Good question. You know, if, what,
Yeah, it's actually, yeah, it's significantly less than the waste hauling, truck. So roughly, I think we were looking at 5 to 6 round trips, a day, you know, to get up to about 50,000 gallons.
Okay.
And if it's your water, you can do more storage of that water on the site. If you're pumping an exempt well, you cannot store that water up during the winter, whereas if it's your water that you're taking out there, you could. So you could kind of levelize that amount of hauling.
And then remind me, what the waste hauling traffic would look like, or how many round trips that would be?
30. Yeah.
30 round trips.
30 round trips.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Weighted miles, that's counting for the different transfer stations, it's 18, but from not, it's roughly 15 miles.
Yeah, I saw that in a couple of different considerations. Sometimes it talked about distance to waste centroid and sometimes it was weighted miles. What's the difference there?
One's a direct measurement from the waste centroid, if you figure, basically not landfill is the centroid, we've got transfer stations in all directions from here. You just do Google Maps from not to the site, that's distance to waste centroid. Weighted miles accounts for all the different haul routes and the volume of municipal solid waste coming from each of those.
So it's a more precise version of.
It is, so you're accounting for Negus and that weight, so that weight is, you know, what percentage it is.
Okay, northwest, southwest,
Yeah.
okay, those are much longer hauls.
Okay,
So it does kind of skew up the mileage there, but you know, if they're compared by the same method, then it's accounted for. Let's see, environmental considerations, within North line of Deer Winter Range and ODFW Category 2 winter habitat, these impacts are mitigatable. It's about a mile now from low density sage-grouse habitat, and the indirect impacts are also mitigable. And that's the key change, or a key change for this site, is the adjustment of sage-grouse mapping. And Golden Eagle Nest, talked about that, based on the buffers provided by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, between 1.5 to 2 miles from the site. And that can be mitigated as well. Zoned SM and EFU with overlays for wildlife surface mining adjacent to Horse Ridge, we talked about that, and the Badlands Wilderness. Nearest home is 0.36 miles northwest. There's another one nearby there, maybe 0.4, 0.5 miles away. There are 2 homes fairly close in that sense. The site is visible from Horse Ridge frontage road and limited portions of Highway 20. And so I was given a low Ramona score due to the fact that it can be seen from those nearby trailheads and homes, but it may, in some ways, could be seen as more remote than the score lets on in the way that it's kind of tucked in to that. Cultural resources, there was a prior partial survey done and no significant resources were found, but except for isolates such as a projectile point, lithic scatter, and can dumps. That was recorded in 1996, when this site was actually studied before in comparison to Moon Pit. It's yeah, we got a deja vu perhaps for. And so, and others who were involved with that, some from the project team. So given that it's considered that there's low potential for buried sites due to the terrain and the disturbance that's occurred on the site. Utilities and infrastructure, there's no power on site. There need to be roughly a 7-mile 3-phase extension from Dawes Road. If 3-phase power is needed to run the leaching. Quite an electrical upgrade.
I'll also just mention, I do a lot of work in transportation electrification and have given input really early on in the last process that when we're looking out over 100-year time frame, this kind of hauling to be electric, as one of the commenters mentioned, in a relatively short time, I think should be considered in that planning. And I don't know exactly how the operations work, but where haul trucks live overnight, and whether that would be at this site or whether it would be at the other locations, but we're already running three-phase power, then that can be doable and, but just how we can include that in the process and have it, maybe that's in the final that we add that component, but, would be happy to talk more.
That was actually considered.
It
Okay.
was, yeah, it was considered in the more detailed investigations
Okay.
on the sites. With the idea in both cases, I believe that they owned back here, or back at their transfer stations
Okay.
where we had the power, you know, to be able to do that.
As a part of the greenhouse gas emissions, I think they might have been a memo. And we modeled three different, or two different fleet transitions from what you have now to natural gas, then to electric trucks. Okay, that's roughly 40 years out where that transition goes. And so you can see the greenhouse gas emissions modeled by that. So, yeah, that's somewhat accounted for.
And that was renewable natural gas actually from.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious, certainly going electric is a big positive from a environmental impact standpoint. But I'm curious is the cost of transport, how does that change switching from fuel to electricity? I'm assuming it's not gonna be cheaper. Maybe much better environmentally, but it's probably not gonna be cheaper. Cost of transportation is gonna continue to go up, no matter the mode you use, I believe. That's my opinion.
It is, although what's interesting is that the cost of an electrification does tend to, it's more stable somewhat versus the higher cost of diesel and even natural gas and things like that. So I think over the longer term, it was kind of seen as a wash somewhat between the two. While you pay more capital, you pay less for fuel.
We modeled the haul costs, I think at $160 an hour based on the route, and that inflated over time, with the cost index. We kept it at $20-23 for the purpose of the analysis. But, everything would go up, but, presumably that capital cost would be captured in that hourly. The haul cost. But we did model the fleet transitions with respect to cost. That makes sense. Okay, let's continue on. Great questions, good points. I'll just fly through this real quick. High point is development. Soils are great, topography is great, capacity is great. Natural environment, the low point there is the fact that it's within deer winter range and ODFW category 2, field habitat for deer and elk winter range. And so those would need to be mitigated for. And then also site visibility and aesthetic impact for those sites where it can be seen from, the nearby trailheads and Horse Frontage Road and Sport Low there. And that's all on that one. We'll get to the popular one here, Dodds Road. You can see,
Can I just make one more comment or question? So on the last slide, the wildlife area, I know that our natural environment section doesn't specifically call out disturbed areas or not, but just recognizing that this is a significantly disturbed site. Compared to the other ones, so even if this site and a mirrored site, both were in the same wildlife zones, this one's disturbed and another one might not be, so just recognizing that may not be showing up in the square.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, yeah. There are some ways that that's kind of peripherally captured, like displacement. Impacts, although, that's more so with respect to developments that are being displaced, not natural land being disrupted. Also the cost and now comparative cost factor analysis, accounts positively for sites that already have excavation. Performed. So it shows up a little bit in there, but good point. And so again, we talked about the 3 things in the triangle, like there's cost effectiveness, minimizing human impacts and minimizing environmental impacts or wildlife impacts. This scoring criteria generally captures the environmental impacts the best. And so sites that score well through the score citing criteria generally are the sites that have the lowest impact to mapped habitat. And so Dodds Road scores well in that regard. We've heard from many comments, there are more wildlife here, but in terms of the zones mapped and the mitigation framework, this site scored very well with regard to natural environment. And here's some quick facts about it. Estimated 80-year capacity undulating terrain with shallow basalt. And that limits the excavation and it results in a poor excavation to volume ratio, which basically means a mound in the sky. So it's not great in terms of capacity of terrain. Or soils and geology. Sandy loam over shallow basalt, dust on crust. A lot of crushing would be needed to excavate this site. It wouldn't be able to go as deep because of that, which, results in that poor excavation to volume ratio, the mountain on the landscape problem. And it also, we acknowledge that poor soil depth, that limits the on-site cover availability. And material that's suitable to set the liner on. So there's some challenges there. Groundwater protection, it's deep, it's confined, and it's not within any wellhead protection zones, which are zones for municipal wells, like an Avion well or whatnot. They've got those protection zones. Those aren't here, but there are a lot of exempt wells surrounding this site. Water and power, no on-site wells or water rights. Three-phase power is available near the southwest corner at Dodds and Obernold, so that's beneficial from the standpoint of electrical infrastructure. Haul and access, it's roughly 18 weighted miles from the Waste Centroid. Access via Dodds Road and Highway 20. There's more than 21 homes impacted along the haul route. And so hence it got a bad score with regard to haul route impact. Surrounding land use, it's bordered by farmland, ranches in the Badlands Wilderness area, about a quarter mile to the east. 3 residences within a half mile and about 60, maybe more, maybe less, within 2 miles. Visibility and aesthetics, the landfill prominence, roughly 150 to 200 based on preliminary designs. That's what would be required for 100-year capacity at this site. And the nearby homes cause it to have a low remoteness score and high visibility impact. So that has been reflected, those concerns and issues with the site have been reflected in the site scoring for particularly the land use category. Environmental considerations, it's not in sage grouse or bird and mammal habitat zones, not within county map wildlife zones, but it is within ODFW category 2 mule deer, elk, and deer and elk habitat, which but it's likely not subject to mitigation, but it could be. There's just not a direct nexus between category 2 habitat that ODFW has on their maps and mitigation requirement. If it was mapped by the county, then it would have that direct link. But yeah, there's still that mapped habitat. So it was scored accordingly. Zoning, EFU, alfalfa, subzone, and it's non-high value farmland because it's not irrigated. The vacant site, which means it's an undisturbed site, but there's also no use displayed in it. So both things there. There's a historic abandoned canal that crosses the site and estimated to have low archaeological potential based on the landforms and the geology. Here's a little more detail on these. Not great in terms of site characteristics and engineering. Generally, this is, the weaker point of this site relative to other sites. Natural environment is where it scores well, and a lot of that has to do with the weight that the sage grouse area combining zone has in the criteria. It's heavily weighted, and it's one of few sub criteria under the natural environment category. And so that drives the results quite a bit. And so that's a big part of what's pushing the score up so much. So land use, not great scoring in that, you know, adjacent land use impacts, this is really tanking in that category, so those concerns are being reflected there. And haul route impacts, got a 1, so it's. I think it's reflecting some of the things that we heard today. So this is a side-by-side of all the sites. In terms of how they perform against the site characteristics and engineering criteria. We have Moon Pit included here for reference. Negotiations are paused, but it hasn't been otherwise ruled out. So it's still there for reference, and it helps to benchmark with the other sites that we're now looking at. So you can see where Horse Ridge and Roth East stand relative to Moon Pit. Those appear to be the top scoring sites. You know, if Moon Pit's out of the running, the next best options in terms of site characteristics and engineering, the Horse Ridge site 3.70 and Roth East 3.79. Any questions on that comparison? Okay. From the environmental criteria, Dodge stands head and shoulders above the rest, again, because sage grouse drives that a lot. See, you know, the fact that it's not in a sage grouse zone or a mapped wildlife zone. Again, this is one lens to look through, but the scoring does not dictate the decision. Just one lens to look at these sites through and to compare them to each other. Land use, based on the criteria and the scoring, Rock East and Horse Ridge appear to be the top contenders with regard to the land use criteria, which accounts for all these things that you here. Any questions on these? Okay. So this is another side-by-side comparison, a little less detail, but you start to see the full picture coming together and how sites score and, you know, in which categories they're strong or weak, perhaps. And you can see how, you know, Moon Pit, Horse Ridge, and Roth East have a nice balance of performance in the different areas, so to speak. You can see Dodds doesn't perform as well in terms of site characteristics and engineering and land use, but has kind of an outsized, you know, strength in the natural environment criteria. And that's really what pushes it up, even though it's inferior to the other sites with regards to site characteristics and engineering and land use. So hopefully this is helpful information for the SWAC to kind of synthesize these different factors. That's the first lens. So let's take that one off and put on the next lens. This is comparative cost factor analysis. And so hopefully this gets at what you want, Leroy, in terms of getting an idea of what these sites would cost. Again, this is qualitative, not quantitative. And so we've established these cost factors, you know, as noted earlier in public comments. Excavation is a huge part of the life cycle costs of the landfill, huge. And so based on the detailed cost estimates that we prepared for Moon Pit and Rock in the final site evaluation, we've adjusted the weighting to match up with that better and to correspond with, you know, the relative costs for the landfill. And we found that road, power, and water infrastructure is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of money spent excavating the landfill over 100 years. There, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Road, power, water, maybe $1 million a pop.
One thing about those is they all hit up front.
Yeah.
And so whereas excavation and waste hauling are spread out over the life of the facility.
So let's take a look at that. And another thing we've done here is we've flipped it from the previous comparative cost factor analysis, where a better score meant a more cost-effective site. We thought it would just make more sense for the bigger number to mean bigger cost, smaller number, smaller cost. And so that helps envision the cost factors in the bar charts. Go next. In terms of these comparative cost factors, scores were assigned based on how much these sites would cost. We have further descriptions on each of these, or rationale behind these, but you can see for excavation costs, the most cost-effective site based on our analysis would be the Horse Ridge site, followed by Rock Northeast and Roth East, with Dodds as the least cost-effective site in terms of excavation. Costs would be high there. All costs, this is a function of distance. And so Rock Northeast and you know, the Rock sites are further out, they got a 3. Horse Ridge and Dodds are closer in, roughly the same haul distance, so. Basically got a 1 there. Road infrastructure costs. Mostly dependent on the access road needed to be constructed. Didn't take much of a deep dive into road upgrades needed at this level in this initial look, but if that was determined that say a road upgrade would be needed, then that would drive up the cost. And honestly, that may be a part of Horse Ridge, honestly, to upgrade that. I think it's an oil mat road, so it may need a little more than what we're showing here, but it is directly off of.
Intersection as well.
Yeah. But it's right on the road, so there's not a mile of access road needed to access. That's not needed to access that site, right off. Power infrastructure, that's related to the length of three-phase power extension needed to get there, and then water infrastructure. And you can see how sites there. So, yeah, higher cost, higher number. And so, here we can see how in terms of cost, it's anticipated that the development and operational costs could likely be the lowest for the Horse Ridge site. That's what we conclude from this. And this graph puts together those different values and stacks them. So you can see the components and the combined score. Bigger number, bigger cost, smaller number, smaller cost.
How do you factor in the purchase cost in this?
Well, we don't have that number.
Right.
So we didn't really.
Yeah, we did not at this comparative because we didn't have those numbers for all the sites. We generally know those numbers for Roth East and for Moon Head.
Right.
But we don't for the others at this point. And again, it's relatively low in the overall cost development of the site. So this is a qualitative cost assessment. So, we only did these 5 factors.
Okay, yeah. And so if I know that you talked about road, water, and power infrastructure as being a smaller percentage in the pie, but how would purchase costs, like in rough proportionality, fit into that pie if it was included? Even not considering the different.
It is a good question, and it would probably be like a 10% item there. Which would come out of some.
Yeah, everything would
Yeah.
adjust, but okay, that helped me.
Great question. It is a good question, because, Moon Pit is, for instance, when we were looking at that, it had a much higher acquisition cost.
Yeah.
Than Roth.
Okay, yeah.
But a lower home cost.
Yeah.
Right.
So, at this level, we felt this was an appropriate way to look at costs, given the number of sites here and the step of study appropriated. So hopefully this helps compare. You can see Roth Northeast and Roth East, they land somewhere in the middle, and Dodds is expected to be the most expensive site. So hopefully that's helpful for cost comparison. The last lens that we'll look through, this is the analysis that accounts for impacts to people. So we looked at the number of recorded dwellings within 1 and 2 miles of each site, and that's based on county records and the structure, the improvement reports. So unpermitted structures weren't counted, but there's 3 established residences within 1 mile and within 2 miles of Horse Ridge. Relatively, that's pretty great. Dodds, you can see both on the page and in the room, there are a lot of residential impacts associated with this site. 83 dwellings within 1 mile and 86 within 2. It's pretty significant. Ross East sites, this one's kind of tricky because we have both sites shown here. But there's 2 registered dwellings, permitted dwellings within 1 mile of the Roth Northeast site, which is this orange radius here. And then 4 dwellings within 2 miles. The Roth East site, similar, just has a slightly different location of the disposal area, and it captures more of the dwellings that are within this area, west of Pine Mountain Road. With this site, again, it's to remind group, I think, the residences identified here are based on structures improvement report. There's a lot of structures that exist out there. Very few of them are permitted dwellings. Unpermitted structures and RVs were not included in the estimated dwelling counts, approximately for sites. And there's a dwelling on the rock tax lot you mentioned, that one wasn't counted as an adjacent residence. Part of the calculation. And so you can see in this analysis, through this lens, the site with the least amount of human and residential impacts is the Horse Ridge site. And then Moon Pit's there shown for reference. It was great with respect to that. But then Dodds is not great in terms of proximity to residences. And then Rock northeast and northeast stands kind of in the middle as a moderate choice. So enough of me talking. We really want to hear from the SWAC.
Yeah.
So let's take it back over.
Yeah, so we asked these questions up front, so you kind of be thinking about those as we went through. And we'd like to have further discussion on these. You raised some really good questions during the conversation here, or during the presentation. So if you have items you want to, further questions you have, or to start answering these questions, you know, just to start getting a feel for what you're thinking about the sites. Also recognizing that a decision does not have to be made today, a final decision, obviously. This is a chance for you all to ask, is there more information you'd like to help make your decision? Of the county as a consulting team and others that we can help add some more information for your decision making.
I think one of the things that jumped out to me when looking at kind of the categories, how they scored is, you know, for example, Dodds scored really well in the natural environments due to the weighted of the categories. Can that be re-looked at or reevaluated? Because if we are to go in more in depth in these sites, and we have kind of weighted categories that might be skewing something, could that potentially further impact how our sites are rated if you're looking at it from that lens? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind answering that one. So, yes, what the process that was done before relative to the development of the rating, parametrics put together an initial proposal. It came to the SWAC. The SWAC did some modifications to the weighting. It then went to the Board of County Commissioners, who did a little bit more work and then ultimately approved. If we want to modify the weighting and therefore scoring on particular elements, we would have to, the SWAC would have to make a recommendation. So that it's going to take more time than what we could do in today's meeting, but that could be an agenda item for next meeting. We could modify the scoring protocols or criteria if we want to, and make a recommendation to the board. But if we want to change that scoring matrix, it ultimately has to be approved by the Board of County Commissioners.
Dodd was removed from the list last round.
It was.
Capacity?
Capacity was the primary reason, yes.
So is the analysis you've done on the new sites, has that been done at the same level of detail as the Moon Pit site?
No,
Not yet.
not yet, no. So Moon Pit has gone, we've done a lot of extra work on that, additional drilling and other work. So the only sites that have had that are Moon Pit and Rock East. Everything that we're doing at this point is on available information. Horse Ridge had more available information because you looked at it 30 years ago. As part of the process way back then. And then, you know, because it's an active mining operation, they have information, you know, from it. But otherwise, there's no new information on those. And so we don't have that in-depth evaluation. The one other thing I would like to point out, and this is a factor, particularly with Dodd, and that is on the height out there. If a height restriction was to go into play, as I noted earlier, that could significantly reduce the volume of that site and get it down even lower than we have right now for it. And so I think that's an important consideration to be thinking about on that site.
Yeah, I guess related to that, and thinking back to the previous process, and thinking of the like uncertainty metric, you know, like not in the scoring, but like what are the identified potential wildcards for each site, or like additional things that aren't in our fatal flaws, but could bring up a potential fatal flaw. And I think just if you all, like going through the process, identify things like that, like, oh, well, we're doing this calculation, the height, like this really is a critical component. If something addresses that, that could change things. Or offsite improvements, we don't think that that's really a thing here, but you know, this one might, just recognizing how big of an impact that was with the land use component for the Moon Pit site. I think even if it's not included in citing, I'd really like to see some mention of those items.
That's great, like the ODOT impact of, going those,
Rob. Or sorry, Moon Pit.
And I mean, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, right.
Drops to 80 years.
Yeah.
Or below.
Real quick comment, I've got to jump off into another board meeting, unfortunately, but I wanted to say, just based on the data and the research that has been concluded so far, at this point, kind of my order would be Roth East 1, Horse Ridge 2, and Roth Northeast 3. I really think the Dodge Road, after listening to the public comment and also just knowing the ongoing excavation cost of that project, I think it would not be in the most best use of the county to spend funds in that manner. So those are kind of my recommendations at this point.
Yeah,
I would second that. And I too got to jump too, so.
Thank you all, I appreciate it.
I think we can move on.
You wanna raise a motion?
Well, that's what we didn't have a motion, we had a second. So any further discussion on that?
So this would be removing Dodge from consideration through this whole process, right?
Yes, from further.
Focus our time on the raw sites and.
And what are the rationale for that? But I think, and the last time this group met and we went around, there was a lot of, let's just not think about this one anymore. We don't want to do this one, we don't want that. We need to be very, very careful about making those kind of decisions and the rationale for that, because you can get into legal trouble. So these good people make a good argument for removing Dodge Road. Well, every site has some residences that are going to be impacted. And those people on the other sites are going to say, well, how come those guys got a pass and we didn't? You know, so I'm really referring to the process and making sure that the decisions we make are sound and defensible.
So between this meeting and the next meeting, how much more analysis is going to happen? Like, if we were moving to final and you were doing a whole, you know, a ton more research, that would be different than keeping something on the table when we're still meeting here. I guess that's a question that I think is in the next slide for next steps, but I think would influence how I would vote in this motion too.
Yeah, additional information that could be expected at the next meeting is more info on acquisition potential. As we have more discussion, ODOT, COID, learn more about that. Also, we'll have more time to do grading estimates, do a landfill model and create visualization showing how deep and tall it would need to be to provide adequate capacity or what those capacity limits are. And so those would be kind of the additional levels of study, as well as anything specific that the committee wants us to do some homework on.
Can I ask a question?
I think at this time, we're kind of over time, so we want SWAC to have a chance to talk, but we can talk after.
So having said what I just said, I will say that I would vote in favor of removing this from the consideration. I think the scoring you've done so far is a justification that you need to defend that decision. Yeah.
didn't the scoring put this Dodds as the highest?
Yeah, but you have to-
Looking through all three lenses.
Okay.
Yeah, I think is what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
But
has,
I think it's fair to call out that there is a higher weight in the natural environments that's causing the elevated score for dogs. When you look at everything else, it's actually one of the lower, when you look at the other factors, it's one of the lower rated sites and it's the highest cost site. So I think it makes sense from those lines and that perspective that this site doesn't make sense to move forward.
Do have a comment from Cassie here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think that I agree with, kind of looking at these results that taking off Dodds would make sense, but kind of going off of what Tim shared, Tim's kind of thoughts on that is particularly after going through what we went through last time, where we had a bunch of sites and we were kind of taking things off because certain things didn't look good. We got down to like a very, very tiny list of options so quickly. And so I do think that while I agree Dodds seems like it's not a likely contender, I also wouldn't mind keeping it in for another meeting or two and doing a little bit more due diligence, just because we could come back by next month, find out something happened with the Horse Ridge site on the acquisition side, and then it's completely taken off. And then we're pretty much left with just the Roth site. But I don't have a super strong opinion. If the majority of the group wants to take Dodds off now, I'm okay with that. But I do think that I'm inclined to just keep more on for a little bit longer until we have a little bit more certainty on a couple of options.
And should we include trucking to a third party as part of that analysis and the cost over time? It's not a super popular.
So that was
We talked
relooked
about
at
that
last year, and that was brought to the commissioners again. In fact, Tim Brownell, you may wanna speak to that, your conversation, when you brought that to the commissioners, but that was brought up again. And again, due to the economics and having the control here in county, it was determined to continue going on this process.
Yeah, and I'll just make the comment. So when we went back to the board, when we paused in regards to the Moonpit site, we did ask them, did they want us to reconvene the SWAC? Or would they consider trucking waste out of the market? And they directed staff to reconvene the staff at the SWAC. They did not want to move forward based on the solid waste management plan that they had approved in 2019, that they're committed to explore the development of a new landfill here in the county and want to move forward in that path until it's determined that it won't work.
Further discussion on the motion, is it still open? It's still open. I'll just share it similar to Cassie, even if it doesn't seem like Dodds is the highest because our matrix scored it as the highest. Because even though I think there can be justification to talk about a reason why the scoring matrix might have missed certain components. I think at this point, taking it out of consideration, while we're still gathering information, it's not a significant increase in having one more site that we're doing that evaluation. I think in my mind, it's prudent to keep it on the table, even though it doesn't seem popular with this group, so that can provide some. And I recognize that there's an impact to that, but I could see very easily sites disappearing from the list from outside factors, and then the decision being made for us, without having all the options on the table. So I'm in favor of keeping it on the list.
I mean, just one other point of information, it kind of goes back to what Ryan said, and that is the fact that you will have quite a bit more information, particularly on acquisition, at the next meeting. With conversations both on that side of the road site, but also on Horse Ridge, as far as the conversation.
So we can table the motion.
You can table it to the next time.
We have submitted comments in writing from Robin Bora, committee member. So I don't know if Jeff or Tim wants to review his feedback.
Jeff, if you have those, can you provide it?
Oh, it's long.
Is there a specific part of that, Sue, that you're thinking of with respect to, say, the dog side or the whole thing? Should we read it all?
He responded to each question.
You want it, you read faster.
Sure. Okay, where should we start? So I guess I'll read as Robin. He did spend a decent amount of time reviewing the presentation, and preparing answers to the discussion questions. So regarding the first question about the analyses being accurate and fair, he says, yes, except for the natural resources scoring, that scoring is biased towards or against listed species. Potentially listed species in wetlands, I believe a high score means fewer impacts. For example, Horse Ridge and Moon Pit have existing pits and much of these sites are degraded. Subjectively, their natural resources values may be lower than Dodds Road, which have a higher score than shown. So to your point, yeah, about the destruction of the site. Second, at this point, what site do you think would best serve the county long-term based on the presented analyses? Robin wrote that based on the information presented so far, Horse Ridge may be the best choice. Apparently, 2 landowners are interested and the county needs to speak to ODOT. The site already has considerable environmental degradation. Horse Ridge and Dodds Road are closer to not landfill than the other sites, so lower haul costs and greenhouse gas emissions. Moon Pit should remain open to a revised offer from the owners. So county regarding Moon Pit. So third, are there any sites that you would recommend removing from further consideration? He agrees with dropping the Golden Valley site, which has already been dropped because of the acquisition not being viable or unresponsive in that regard. Are there any additional data or considerations to incorporate? He asked to please share the information we sent to him about potential landfill capacities, final grade above surrounding elevations, etc. SWAC, which I think we have about the prominence of the sites, the estimated lifespan, so you guys have that. Other thoughts and questions, he points out that, the raw sites have a long list of negatives that were identified previously. He's not sure which one's better. Dodds Road will likely have the greatest local resident opposition. His prophecy appears true. The Dodds Road site and others, it discussed with SWAC the possibility of a long-term lease with a set term and buyout at the end. Clearly show the water rights source of water for operations for each site or issues with obtaining them. So that could be something to provide more input or information on next time, the specifics about the water situation for each site. He's asking if he says a person in Bend asked him if eminent domain is an option. I don't know, maybe Stephanie can speak to that one.
I perk up.
And then just the last question, he says, or point he made, as Commissioner Chang recommended, we should proceed with determining acquisition costs and terms and conditions for each site through discussions or negotiation. That information is needed for a committee recommendation. We already have that from Moon Pit Corral. So he's wanting more acquisition info to be a part of the SWAC. Do you want to touch on the eminent domain?
Sure, yeah.
Now, I'm Stephanie Marshall, Senior Assistant Legal Counsel at the county. Yes, eminent domain is an option, to condemn privately owned property for a governmental purpose. It's a fairly complex and complicated and expensive way of going. I've in my past life practicing law in Washington, we represented property owners that were, opposing eminent domain. I mean, they didn't end up actually getting to keep their land, but there's a lot of, what's the fair market value and a lot of things that go into it. And usually it's a fight between the experts as to what the land is worth. Because they'll say, oh, well, my land is worth a whole lot more because you really need it for this landfill. That kind of thing. So, yeah. So, it's an option, but, to be honest, it's not anything that I've been asked to study at this time. I'm sure that if we got to the point where that might be a way to proceed with acquisition, I would do some more analysis and provide that to Tim and the consultants and whatnot before presenting it to the committee.
And I would just add that the board, the current board has expressed opposition to using eminent domain in this process.
It's also very, very time consuming, you know, I mean, it could take 5+ years just to actually get that site through the litigation associated with that. So we would, I mean, I'd say, you know, conservatively, we add 3 to 5 years onto any timelines that we're talking about.
And you make few friends.
Yes. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks, guys.
I just have two quick things for question 4. One is, the Dodge site, talk about blasting and overburden. I seem to remember from the last meeting, there was another site where that was brought up as a reason why it wasn't under consideration. But it seems like those are the same concerns that we have here, and I'm probably missing something, but just recognizing that when we were looking at other sites to be considered. And then I also wanted to highlight the question of diving deeper into the airport distances, just to I think moving forward with what we currently have makes sense, but if we can look at those to make sure that we have a fair understanding of those, and if something came up through the process, I recognize it would be behind in the process. But if a site was not a fatal flood at that point, then to be able to have that information, to be able to make a decision of extending a timeline or saying, you know, these other sites are good enough, so we're not going to include it. I think those are the two pieces from the last conversation that I still have questions about.
This is Cassie again. I have another comment. I wanted to dig in further to something that Robin brought up in his comments about the natural resource score on the Horse Ridge site, because that was sort of what I had questions when you were going through the presentation around those impacts, some of those areas where Horse Ridge scored low on natural resources, especially compared to Dodds. But knowing that Horse Ridge is already an impacted site, I was curious, like, are those, because I understand there's like, it's in the low density sage grouse habitat and also had, I think, like a wildlife migration corridor, I think were the main two things that brought it lower. But my question was, is it going to be worse with the landfill than how it currently is with the existing uses? And I don't know if that's something you can speak to quickly. I know we're way over time, but that's sort of another reason why I think I wouldn't necessarily want to take anything off the table, but really spend a little bit more time to kind of dig into some of these analysis to understand the nuance a little bit more, since, you know, we just ended up having not a ton of time today to do that.
That's a good point, and we could have our wildlife folks take a further look at that, particularly an impacted site that's probably at least 2/3 impacted, and how that would change that score possibly. Yeah.
At this level of screening, the scoring is based on map data, right? Just proximity, areas, zoning, et cetera, and so that's how the score was determined there. There's a bit of a scoring difference between whether we believe it to be mitigated or not, and that takes kind of a bit of a preliminary look into the mitigation framework. At the final site evaluation level that we went through for Moon Pit and Rock, they dive into the functional acres, the habitat quantification tool, and that does specifically account for existing impacts and the habitat quality. And so that we get there, and so we can ask our biologists to take a few steps ahead on these sites into the level of mitigation required for each of the sites. Which would give us a more precise, you know,
And I think
understanding of the impacts.
at the high level, not a lot of research needed,
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
greenfield versus per active mining site. I think having that now, because you don't want. You don't want a known thing to change your product in the final scoring, so just. And we don't have to change our scoring matrix either. I think within existing categories, a different criteria could be used to make sure that those impacts are accounted for. So then we give everything a fair shake, don't overly. Put too much in,
Great points.
I do want to make a comment of a couple things. One, we don't have quorum anymore, and the person who issued the motion and second are both gone, so we're gonna have to table that.
Yeah.
In regards to Dodd Road, so I apologize to people who are in the room who wanted to see that voted on. We're not gonna be able to. Can you move on to next steps here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we're gonna lose almost everybody here if we don't.
Now keep on going. Roadmap, next steps.
For some reason, I'm not seeing that. My apologies.
Got it?
It's not coming up on my computer.
I can go through it. Or Dwight, you wanna?
Yeah, well, we can go through
Yeah.
it, so the next up is the continuation of the SWAC meetings, so the next meeting would be July 15th, same time, same place. And then, at which point we pick up the motion which was tabled. And that meeting, we're gonna bring back additional information, but it's really going to be for SWAC deliberation. So it won't be as long a meeting as today, just because it's more on your deliberation than anything. I would say at that point. And then if needed, the August 19th meeting, more public input, comments, all these comments will be documented and put into the file, so to speak, and available, and then getting more information out to parties.
And the thing I would add is I think by the next meeting, we will know a good bit more relative to acquisition potential on the Dodd Road site and the Horse Ridge site, which may make someone move forward or make the sites mute and off the table. And the one other thing I wanted to add was the recommendation for final evaluation. If we make a recommendation at that August meeting, most likely it will be spilling into August. That would mean, we could make a selection, or if it's final site evaluation, that's a deep dive into one or more of these sites, like we've done with Moon Pit and Rock East. So with that, I want to, unless anybody else on the committee has any final comments or questions, I want to thank everybody for all that you've contributed today, and appreciate all your time and efforts to help us with this process. Any other comments? Hearing none, let's close the meeting and thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Everyone.
The existing acquisitions,
Right, yeah.
based on.